everyone, and welcome to Artists of Color. Artists of Color is a program that talks to and about art and ethnic organizations within the communities of color. And I am glad you were able to join us this afternoon. I am Elaine Hall-Corbin, your host. And today my guest is Christle Rawlins Jackson. Hi, Christle.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing good today.
Good, and I'm so glad you came to join me today. Christle and I have known each other a little bit, but I learned a little bit about Christle that I didn't know before. And what I learned about is she's been on a journey. I call it Christle's journey. Christle has been researching her family tree and her family history. And I've also discovered that she is from Nova Scotia, which I never knew, and her family is from there. So we sat down and we had this discussion a couple of days ago about her search and her journey. And I thought this would actually be a wonderful place to come and have her talk to us and tell us about what she's been doing. So Christle, let's begin by tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I'm an artist, and I'm an avid lover of history. And so many times I use that in the art that I make. I quilt, and I'm also a graphic designer, photographer, and those things, that knowing the history of things inspires me and helps me to create whatever it is that I have in mind.
Okay. Where are you from?
Actually, I was born in Roxbury. And
She's a Roxbury.
But I grew up in Framingham.
Okay.
Which is pointed later when we talk a little bit more about my ancestors. But when I got married, I moved back to Roxbury, and I've been here for over 20 years.
Yeah, it's probably about how long I've known you.
Yeah.
You talk about using history in your art. It inspires you. How? Explain to me. What's the inspiration?
Well, I believe in the notion of Sankofa, which is an Akan proverb.
Yes.
If you're not familiar with it, it's a bird who faces forward but looks backward, which means it translates into if you don't know where you've come from, you can't move forward. You can't go into the future. And so it's been instilled in me through my family to just know about your history, know about your family, because that's the most important thing. And so that's the foundation of my work.
Okay. Now, you're a graphic designer, correct?
Yes.
Okay. How long have you been doing that, and what do you like about being a graphic designer?
Actually, I was trained, I went to art school and I was trained as an illustrator. And, the way the job market goes, I just evolved into being a graphic designer. And I've been doing that for over 25 years, I'd say. I worked in the newspaper industry, I've worked in the corporate industry, I've worked in the educational institutions, doing promotions and marketing.
Now, having been in those different venues, which one did you like the best?
Which one did I? That's a good question. They all were an evolution to where I am now.
To where you are now.
I can see all the benefits from working, and the newspaper gave me the foundation. They were always on the cutting edge of technology, and it was very diverse. I could do, pretty much anything that I wanted to do, as it relates to designing, campaigns and things.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. When did you start your search?
For my ancestors?
For your ancestors.
Well, my grandfather was instrumental in me searching. And so he told me all these stories about our ancestors who were from Nova Scotia. He also said that they were never slaves, which I would dispute. He'd really get angry with me.
He's gonna get you.
But he would take me to different family members' houses, and I realized much later after he was gone that I was the only one that he did that.
Wow.
He took around to see these different people, who later, when I was doing my research, I recognized who they were, because I was really young when he used to take me.
Okay.
And back then,
we have a
Oh, you have pictures?
Yeah, we have a picture here. Tell me.
So This is 5 generations of this is my maternal grandfather's family.
Okay.
And he's the second oldest, and so the man on the left is his brother, and he's the eldest, Edgar Fowler. And his father is pictured there, who's also Edgar Fowler. And then Israel Fowler, who's holding the baby, was born in Nova Scotia, in Digby, Nova Scotia. And the elder is David Fowler, and he was born in Bridgetown, Nova Scotia in 1842 and lived to be 100. And he's the one who's responsible for us being here in Massachusetts. He migrated in the 1880s to Lynn, Massachusetts. He was a carpenter. Okay. Yeah.
Were there a lot of African Americans in Lynn at that time? Or was it a growing community?
I think it was because of the industry. There were, the fishing industry, there were mills there. His son, Israel Fowler, was a teamster, which I thought was with, unions, but they actually taking care of horses is what he did for the coal company.
Oh.
In Lynn, yeah.
Okay.
So there were a lot of trades,
different
jobs, I think, that people of color, and a lot of them were mariners, because of being on the ocean.
This gentleman here?
This is my grandfather, Charles Fowler, and he is the one who took me around to family, and he was also a fisherman and a carpenter, and did all kinds of things with his hands. Yeah.
Was it during that time? Was it good to be able to have different types of trades in order to, provide for your families and?
It seems that back then you did whatever you could do to survive.
Okay. Because during that time there wasn't really training.
David Fowler, who you saw, this is him actually when he was, I think he was probably in his 20s.
Oh.
He was about 6'4". He was a very strong man, and there were all kinds of stories about him. But he was in the 1877 census in Nova Scotia. He and his wife Annie Francis and little Israel, and then their other son Charles, were living they were servants in this house. So I believe he was doing whatever he could. And then in that same year, in 1870, he can be found in Marblehead working as a farmhand. So he was traveling back and forth from Nova Scotia to Massachusetts, trying to make a way for his family.
Yeah. Wow. Is that Annie?
No, this is my grandmother, Aletha Fowler, and her husband was Charles Fowler. So this is my maternal grandparents.
The paternal grandparents. Yeah. Now did they live in Lynn, or did they migrate from
my
Nova Scotia?
grandmother was from Cambridge, and
we did talk about that.
Yeah, she's from Cambridge. Her father was from Barbados, but that's another story. And it's her mother who I've traced back her line to the 1600s. And so my grandparents knew each other since they were children. And the Fowlers who lived in Lynn migrated to Cambridge eventually. And my grandfather would tell stories of walking from Lynn to Cambridge to court my grandmother.
Oh.
Yeah, so.
Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really, but you were able to, did you find that, I don't want to say difficult, but did you find that kind of a little tedious to be able to, trace your roots all the way back to the 1600s?
Well, I think I became obsessed with this.
Okay, I thought there was somewhere in there.
I think that there's a spiritual aspect to it. I always say that my ancestors are whispering in my ear, because sometimes I find things and I don't know how I found it. I just think it's a spiritual journey.
And I think I would have to agree with you. Tell us about this quilt. I've been waiting for the quilt.
So my grandmother had a photo album, And the pictures were fading, and I was really worried that we'd just lose them completely.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to take the photographs and make something that was creative out of them. And I came up with a quilt, which I had never made a quilt before, so this is my first quilt. Actually,
It's fabulous. It's
and
beautiful.
so they're photo transfers of the pictures in the quilts. I mean, in the photo album.
Yeah.
And the center is actually a mask, a cast of my mother's face. So
Oh,
in honoring my
really?
mother, I honor her mother and her
mother,
mother
mother.
before her, and so on and so on.
Oh, that's
And
beautiful.
so I did finish it before my grandmother passed away.
So she got to see
So
it.
she got to see it.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. That
In
is
fact, it was, I don't
beautiful.
know if it was the first exhibit, but it was at AMARP.
Really?
And my grandmother was sitting next to the quilt, and people came and asked her questions about, the history and the photographs. She was really happy that day.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is really wonderful. I want to go back to your search. You're doing what you do and have been doing it for a while. How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing this since the late 90s. And I have to say that after my grandmother died, I was very panicked about preserving our history, because all the stories my grandfather would tell me over and over again, I couldn't remember half of them. And it just so happened that my aunt knew a person who had published this book, and it was actually the genealogy of my family. Part of it, anyway.
Okay.
Yes.
The
20 Families of Color in Massachusetts, which was
Right.
written by Reverend Franklin Dorman. But
Okay.
it gave me information that I didn't know, but it also neglected to include my mother's generation, my generation, and then my sisters. So 3 generations of my family were missing.
We're missing.
Which told me that it's really important that we tell our stories the way that we want our stories
To be told.
instead of relying on someone else to tell the story. And in defense of Reverend Dorman, at that time he was in the archives looking through microfilm, and so it was probably very easy to overlook
all
something
right
or
then.
someone.
So when you found out that, these 3 generations were missing, is that when you really
That's when I really
decided,
Yeah.
I've got to do this?
I've got to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so most of the research that I've done has been online.
Really?
Yeah, pretty much everything.
Do you find I'm not going to say difficult, but do you find doing research, because see, I've really not done a lot of research online myself, and I'm interested in working on doing my own history of my own family on both, especially on my mom's side, both my grandparents, like I know who my great-grandparents are on both my grandmother and my grandfather's side. Mm-hmm. But that's, I'm just wondering if it,
Well, I
doing it
joined
online.
Ancestry.com.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Did you find, I've heard, you always hear, they always do these commercials and things about them, but did you find it easy to use?
It was, well, for me, I'm a graphic designer. I'm used to using the computer and, searching for information online and using software. So it really wasn't an issue. I thought it was pretty intuitive.
Oh,
It was a
okay.
great program, and what was really amazing is that you connected with other people. So I found so many people that I'm related to and who were willing to share the information that they had.
Oh,
So
see,
I
that's the
had one of
beautiful
my
part.
lines of family is in the UK.
Oh, wow.
So, and it was David Fowler, who you saw,
Right.
his brother's line. They ended
They're
up
in the
in
UK?
In the UK, yeah. So
That's
it's just
fantastic.
amazing. The internet has just opened it up, and as I'm searching at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, there's other people doing the same
thing you're doing.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's just, I would love to, I like history and I want to learn more about my own family, and I like, ethnicity and tradition and things of that nature. And it's just, you wonder what you'll find out when you start to do the search. You know,
but you
'cause
also have to be prepared,
to-
because sometimes you find things that you don't want to know.
I remember, that's true, but I remember, I want to go back where you were talking about how your grandfather used to take you places. Like I remember you telling me when you and I were meeting about you going to Nova Scotia and talking to people, and how that was a little bit, people did not want to talk.
Yeah, they didn't.
You know, was that, did you find that for you a little bit, you know, well, you know, why, how come, you know, I'm a family member, you know, and maybe, you know, you want to preserve the history and the lineage.
My family has always been very secretive. I mean, my grandfather told me stories, but he told me the stories he wanted to tell me.
You.
And my grandmother didn't really want to talk about anything. And I realized after researching, her mother died when she was 12, so she didn't really remember a lot.
Oh,
and it was
okay.
painful. And a lot of people of color, African Americans, they're very secretive about the history, you know. My father used to say, you know, you keep your skeletons in the closet, you don't keep opening up the door. So,
I remember
and I
that
think a lot of, you know, so a lot of my family, you have to wait, you have to gain trust.
Yeah.
And sometimes you run out of time and the person passes. And that information is gone. So maybe it just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah. Did you find that it was easier to get more information? Like you said, you got a lot of information off online, but when you talk to people, you know, I know, you know, the secretive thing, and I understand that. I have that in my own family, so I can understand. Because a lot of my own family, I don't even know.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I want to be able, you know, I want to know, because I have children and I have grandchildren. And I just want to know, while doing your search, what were your feelings behind doing it?
Well, I was very excited to know.
You still are.
And very curious about things, but I also felt more comfortable dealing with dead people as opposed to the living. But now that I've actually gone to 2 family reunions.
Oh yeah.
Because I met people, you know, living people, descendants, and it's been a really fantastic experience. Where some people feel like you may take the information and you'll do something
with it
that they won't
really
like.
don't want you to do.
Yeah, so you just have to deal with each person on their terms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know, as you came in and you brought us a lot of information and pictures of things, and hopefully we can, you know, go back to some of that and we can get some more information, and you can tell us, you know, how. I noticed you have a lot of pictures about different things. You have, I think, census information, and I was noticing when we were getting ready to do the show that there was what I think is a letter.
Oh, that's actually on my maternal grandmother, Aletha Fowler. That is actually a petition for to sell land. Okay. And this goes all the way, my grandmother's maternal line goes back to the 1600s, and it's the Nipmuc people.
Right.
And the Nipmuc people were in Worcester County, in particular Natick, Massachusetts, and that's why I said growing up in Framingham. Framingham is right next to Natick.
Yes.
And so they were the keepers of that land in that area. Sherburne, Lancaster, Needham, all that land, all that area was owned or kept by they were like the landlords of the land. And when the colonists came and were settling Massachusetts, of course they were encroaching on this land. And so, and this is a long way around to get to the petition, but you have to tell the story to understand. And so the Indians in Natick decided the best way would to give the land to the colonists,
Oh.
so that there would be peace, and that perhaps they'd find a way to live together with the colonists.
Coexist.
Which is different than what King Philip, King Philip he didn't want to give anything up,
to anything.
right, because it didn't belong to them, and he was willing to fight to his death, which he did. But these native Indians, also known as praying Indians, gave over the land. And so that would be, I think it's my 8th great-grandfather, Josiah. This is the petition here.
Yes.
Yeah, the petition. So I'm going to getting confused here, but it's Hannah Speen, who was his daughter, who either was ill or for some reason she came into a difficult time financially, and so she had to sell her land. And Indians could not just sell their land, they had a guardian. So they would have to petition the court and ask permission if they could sell the land, and the guardian would do it on their behalf. And so that's what this letter is.
Now the guardian, is the guardian one of the colonists?
Yes. It would be someone in the community that knows them, that can vouch for their character or has some kind of relationship with them. Maybe they own land in the vicinity. So they would have these guardians, and they lost their land eventually because there was no means for them to make a living, and so they'd have the money that they had was in the land.
Oh, wow.
And so this document that they're showing now is from 1719, and this is the document that is based upon the meeting that they had with the colonists to sign over the land. And those are there's a list of native people who signed over, which was the Speen family. And those are my ancestors. And so my grandfather, Josiah Speen, has written his name in this list. And so that's what you're looking at. Okay. The agreement that they would hand over their land, and then they would be given lots back, like square lots. Like the English, the colonists were used to, having a square lot with building a house, and that was not the way that they lived. They were very free and open, and that was their land. They moved from place to place depending on the season, the cranberries, fishing, and the colonists just thought that was so chaotic. And what I think is really amazing about this particular document is what they're showing you now is on the right is actually a hand drawing of where my grandfather's land is. It says so many rods wide and near a brook and so on and so forth.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I haven't actually gotten to the point where I would try to find this piece of land.
I was going to say
that's on the list of things
to do.
Yeah.
It's part of the search.
But I just thought it was amazing. And I found that online, that document.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
Just the whole process. I have a question for you that I want to ask because you mentioned it back. Why was the praying Indians? Were they the Nipmucs?
Yes.
Why were they given that name?
They were given that name because of John Eliot. And if you're from the Boston area, you must have heard of John Eliot, even if you don't know.
Oh, yes.
He's done so many things. He built the first Congregational Church, which is right here in Dudley, in Eliot Square. And he's actually buried across from Tropical Market.
He's buried there?
He's buried in that old burial ground there.
I didn't know he was buried there.
But he came here from England in the 1600s, and I actually don't know how he became involved with the Native Americans and Natick, but he put it upon himself to help them to be able to get along with the colonists. And he thought if they were more like the colonists, then they'd have a better chance of surviving. And through that, they became the the praying Indians,
Praying
and he
Indians.
was the apostle to the Indians.
So they lost a lot of their tradition and their way of life because, well, that's what I'm thinking. Because when John Eliot came in and he thought about working on trying to help them become more cohesive with the colonists, then he figured they had to become religious, or what the colonists called religion.
He converted
them.
He
basically.
converted them to Christianity. And there's a story about the sachem Wabin, which his name means wind, and it just so happened that John Eliot, read a scripture that included wind, and so that made some of the Indians think that, well, maybe Christianity isn't so bad, and I'll convert. But it was a really terrible time for them because they were torn between their traditional customs and culture, and becoming more Christian-like, cutting their hair, wearing English-style clothes as opposed to their traditional
traditional dress, sure.
Right. And some of them were sent away to school, and culturalized to the European ways. So but as I don't know if you can weigh it against how other Native people have been treated, but because they developed this system which we use today as like the city council. I mean, they would have these town meetings. They would translate them in English and in the Algonquin language, because John Eliot was also responsible for converting the first Bible into the Algonquin language. With the help of the Native people. So many of the
so that meant they had to learn English
in order
to convert the Bible into their language.
Well, he learned.
He learned it.
He learned the Algonquin language.
Okay. Wow.
What's written says that he didn't learn it very well, and he had the Native people who learned English to translate the Bible for him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and print it for him.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Well, we've been having a great talk, and we're going to have a lot more. And today, my guest is Christle Rawlins Jackson, and I'm calling this segment Christle's Journey. Christle, thanks for being with me today. I really appreciate it, and I'm loving the conversation. Okay. I really am. Well, let's see. You were talking about the changing of the language for the creating the Bible, and you're saying how John Eliot learned the Algonquin language. He didn't learn it very well, but he learned it. But someone else who knew the English language, one of the Algonquins did it for him. Now, I know we can't see this very well, and we know that. But you want to tell my audience what it is?
It's actually a genealogy chart, just to give you some idea of and each row is a generation of people. So this goes back to I think it's Old Speen, which would have been the father of Josiah Speen.
Okay.
So I think it's 9 generations.
Oh wow. Interesting. Now, did you put that together yourself?
Yeah, I used a software program.
Okay. Yeah. Oh. And
so they have various software programs, and this is the Fowler family that goes back to Reuben Fowler, and as you saw David Fowler's picture, and so as far back as I can go is his father, who was a black loyalist. Yeah.
Well, I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for this. This is great. Let's talk about the black loyalist. Let's give my audience, who were the black loyalists?
Well, my grandfather would always say that we were from Nova Scotia, and I didn't know where Nova Scotia was, and I didn't know anything about Nova Scotia. But when I started my research, I found that we were from Nova Scotia, and that we were descendants of black loyalists. Now that term was coined sometime in the 70s. I don't know how they identified themselves prior to that, but the loyalists were those loyal to the crown, to the British. Okay. And so during the Revolutionary War, those who fought with the British were loyalists, and they were fighting against the Patriots. So you probably heard of that before, right? The Patriots.
Yes.
And the British, England didn't really want to fund this war. It was just too expensive. There was other things going on that they wanted to invest their money in, and so they started soliciting African Americans, free and enslaved, to fight for liberty, to fight with the British. And so they came in droves to fight for freedom.
I have a question. You're saying free and enslaved. How did the enslaved African Americans get to be able to do that without being caught?
There were so many. There was no way that the slave owners could keep up with them running away.
Oh, wow.
There were just thousands upon thousands.
Okay.
There were so many, there wasn't enough food, there wasn't enough, uniforms, ammunition. I mean, it was men, women, and children.
Oh, my heavens. Men, wait a minute, women and children?
Women and children. Yeah, there were lots of women who also participated. You know, that you needed someone to wash clothes in the camps and cook food, and along with them came their children. And many times it was whole families that were escaping from slavery. So some of those were my ancestors. And unfortunately for the British, they lost the war. And there was this soldier, Guy Carleton, who negotiated the Treaty of Paris, and this was under George Washington. And he really fought for black loyalists to also be included in this package, compensation for them surrendering. And they were relocated to Nova Scotia. And there were about 3,000 of them documented that were relocated to Nova Scotia, put on ships, and they sailed from New York to, I think, Halifax and different ports in Nova Scotia. And this is documented in the Book of Negroes.
Which was also a movie.
Yeah, they just recently made it a movie, which is based on the historical. I didn't actually see it, but I've read the book.
And I want to read the book anyway. But
the book is very good, but it's based on historical fact, but the characters themselves are fictional.
Okay.
So the 3,000, and I don't know how many white loyalists. So there were so many people that came, and they just thought it would be a great boon for economic development of Nova Scotia because it was underpopulated.
Oh.
And what happened was that didn't happen. It was very difficult for all. And of course, black people got the worst of it. They didn't. They were promised that they would get their, like 40 acres and a mule. They were supposed to get land and compensation. And for the most part, they did, because there wasn't enough land to go around. And if you look at the documentation, white lawyers would get like 400 acres of land, and the black loyalists would get one acre. And it would be the worst land that wasn't farmable.
They couldn't do anything with it.
Right. So those were my ancestors.
Wow. Now, I'm going to ask you about Birchwood.
Oh, Birchtown.
Birchtown.
Yeah.
Tell me about Birchtown.
Well, Birchtown was the first settlement of black loyalists. And there were many militias and troops that were formed here in the United States at the time.
Yes.
And so one of those was the Black Pioneers. And
Never heard of
the black
that.
pioneers were the ones that they sent to Nova Scotia to clear the land so that people could live there. So they went in, and Birchtown was part of that. I did go to Birchtown and see one of these, like a replica of how they were living. It was really, it was, they dug a hole in the ground, and it had like a thatch roof on top, and that's how they were living in the winter.
What?
Yeah, so it was like kind of underground.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So it was, I say all that to say that it was really very, very difficult. And so they were, you know, giving them food and blankets and
really
things like that. Mm-hmm.
But there was really no shelter.
No,
They
they
were
had to
living-
make their homes. Yeah,
You're right.
right.
Oh. Was it a large, like how many?
It was the 3,000 people.
Oh, was the
3,000 people. And along with whoever walked over the border or rode over the border. But it is, this 3,000 people were documented.
Sorry, I'm a little shocked because of the part of, you know, living thatched in the ground.
Right.
And oh my God.
And that was Birchtown, and my ancestors settled in Annapolis County, which is on the other side of Nova Scotia. And I don't really understand how the settlements happened. You know, that's another area for me to research. But when they talk about the Black Loyalists, they're usually talking about those who settled in Birchtown.
In Birchtown.
Yeah.
Today, is Birchtown still an African American community, or is it totally?
Their descendants are still there.
Okay.
But there's a museum there, and there are some remnants of the town. Oh. But during the 70s, I believe, I'm not 70, I think it was the 70s, they actually bulldozed the area because they just thought it was an eyesore.
This is history.
Yeah.
And they bulldozed it?
Yeah.
Because they wanted the land. That was really what it was. It was more of, you know, obliterating the people that were there originally.
It's the same formula, different place, same
different
formula.
Place, different time. They're doing it now, but we know that.
And I should mention that early on, they really were trying to figure out a way to get rid of the Africans who settled there, because it was so difficult and there was not enough for everyone. And one of the things they did was ask them if they would want to go back to Africa, because they were organizing. They wanted to settle a town in, well, what is now Sierra Leone.
Oh.
And so they were looking for people to
go there.
To go
so
there.
they were asking these people here whether they wanted to go back to Africa.
Right, and half of them went.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. So some of those descendants from Nova Scotia, yeah,
have went back.
Right. Wow. And that's a whole nother story.
Sure. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about Annapolis County. I mean, we've talked about it, but what you've discovered and what you've researched, what was that?
I can't really say too much. I haven't really.
You haven't
been there.
Okay. But you've been to Birch.
Yeah.
You've been to Birchtown.
I went to a conference in Halifax, and so part of that was to go to the different places and learn about the history, and they have a cultural center. So I know a lot. So that's what I'm saying. My ancestors always seem to be the ones they're not talking about so much. You have to go and dig for the information. But it was a thriving community and a very close-knit community. And as far as I can tell by looking at the census and where they lived in Annapolis, they all were very close, and then they migrated together. To Lynn, Massachusetts.
How long was your, do you know when they migrated from?
I would say they started migrating probably from the 1840s on.
Okay.
Between the 1840s and 1820s, there was a huge migration of people moving back to the U.S.
To the U.S. from Canada,
yeah,
from Nova
Canada.
Scotia.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I only discovered this because I was looking for my ancestors. And I always say that you have to read between the lines, because I think Black people back then didn't want to be found. It was a means of survival and protection. Because
I agree.
I tried to imagine what it must have been like to be a free person of color when the slavery is still
going on. Yeah.
And everybody has seen 12 years of slave and seen how he was a free man and just taken into. And so that was
a fear.
That was quite typical for someone to just be captured.
Yes.
You know, they actually would have signs offering a job or something, and it would actually be a slave catcher.
Yeah.
In fact, Annie Francis, who was married to David Fowler, her ancestors go back to the Black Loyalists, and her, it would have been a grandfather, he fought in the Revolutionary War, and he is listed in the Book of Negroes as living at Phillips Manor in Yonkers. And I looked that up, and Phillips Manor is where they signed the Declaration of Independence.
Yep.
And so, but I also found something on him that said that there was a man named Lot who said that he owned him. And so it went to court, and that's why I found this online again.
It went to court.
It went to court, and he had to prove that he was not the slave of this Mr. Lot. And so he had a General Birch certificate, which meant that he was probably a Black pioneer or something. Yeah. So obviously he got away because
I was going to say,
yeah, because he did get land and.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm, excited to know, the process that you've gone through and your journey. And what you've learned, which I'm sure, is like wonderful and fantastic. And if someone, give us a little idea, if someone wanted to do that, wanted to start and don't know anything about beginning a search for their family history, what would you tell them? Or where would you tell them to begin?
Well, the first thing to do is just to write down everything that you know. Start with you, your parents, your grandparents, and so on and so forth. And then go to the people who are still living and start asking them questions, interview them, record them, videotape them. And that's how you start. And you'll find that you'll find a little bit of information, and you'll be able to follow up on that, and it just keeps going on and on and on.
Okay. Now you said you started, you used, well, I don't know if you used all of that, but you said you started with Ancestry.com.
Yes.
Now, we don't talk numbers, but is that a free program or is it not?
You can get an account on there for free, but you don't have access to too much.
Okay.
So I paid for as long as I could pay, and I think it was worth it. But now I really use the Church of the Latter-day Saints website, which is familysearch.org, and they have a lot of records there that you can look up for free.
The Church of Latter-day Saints?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
No, I mean, I know about them, but I didn't know that they had a lot of...
Part of their mandate as a church, I guess, or a member of the church, is to know your ancestry.
Oh.
And so they've been keeping records, very good records, for many, many, many years.
Oh my goodness.
And it's because of them that you can find some records that, that relate to African American people. So
that's interesting, because that's something I never knew.
Yeah, and you can go to Utah. They have a big genealogy center with all the information. And genealogists make treks there all
Really?
the time.
All the
Yeah.
time?
Yeah.
So, one would do that, because the reason I'm asking is because my mother is an elder, and she's always talking about different things that happen and different people in her lifetime, from before her and my grandparents came to Boston, because my mom came to Boston in 1941 with my grandparents. And my mother's never been back home, since. But like I said, I've got children and grandchildren. Now my mom's got great-grandchildren. And, you would want to be able to tell your history to your children, and be able to keep that, keep that lineage going and be able to know. I don't know how to ask this. It's like you've been doing this, and you've been doing it since the 90s?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I hope to publish something at some point.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
And I hope to do it in a way that's creative, as opposed to, I want it to be somewhat scholarly, but at the same time I want it to be
just
approachable, informative.
Yeah,
for a family member.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now people don't really worry too much about the history. They just say, well, Christle knows. Which I would really love to have someone else,
Yes, can somebody else know this besides me? That way, if you were to, like you said, you're hoping someday to publish. So if you publish, then you won't have to worry about people asking you, Christle knows.
Well, someone will have to, take the baton.
And run with it,
because
and continue.
It continues to evolve and unfold. And I think that one of the, when I found out about the Nipmunk and how I'm related, that was just because I was actually living in West Africa. I was living in Ghana, and I was online. And then
you just kept going.
Yeah. And
wherever you were, you continued.
And I found out this information, and then I found someone who was a family member, and I contacted them, and then they told me they had pictures.
Oh, see.
So I just thought that was amazing.
Yeah. I want to go back to the quilt for a second. When you started working on the quilt, and I know the pictures that are in there, how did you do that? How did you put the pictures?
What was
that process?
I scanned them.
Okay.
I scanned them into the computer, enhanced them the best I could, because some of them were really faded. So I do a lot of restorative work with old photographs and things. So I did that, and I blew them up because they were very small, like maybe 1 inch, little teeny pictures. So I blew them up, and then I used T-shirt transfers and ironed them on to fabric.
Okay.
So.
Okay, yeah, because I'm excited about that. I think that is so beautiful. Besides the pictures that are in there, can you tell us what some of the, I'm sure it's African design, or is it Native American design?
There's mud cloth in there, which is from, I'm blanking on where that's from, but it's West Africa.
Okay.
And there's a symbol of a bird.
Oh, up the top?
Yeah.
Yes.
In the Yoruba culture, a black bird is a symbol of women.
I didn't know that.
And so in my research, it's very difficult to find details about women, especially when they take the man's surname. It's really difficult to find about them and really get a sense of what their life was like. So I chose to honor women by
I like
putting
that.
my mother's face in the center.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. That is so beautiful. Do you put that on? You have that on your wall at home?
Actually, I don't. She comes out every now and then in quilt shows.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In fact, that quilt traveled around the country with Roland Freeman's Communion of the Spirit, quilt
never
show.
heard. Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard of the women quilters that they were here in Boston, actually, or in Massachusetts
Oh,
area.
the G's Bend quilters?
Yeah, and I never got to see them. So
Roland Freeman traveled
that?
around the country. He's a African-American photographer, and he traveled around the country photographing African-American quilters, and then he came out with a book called Communion of the Spirit.
never
And that
heard
was
of it.
really before the G's Bend quilters really came to notoriety, but they're in the book as well.
They are. I'm going to have to look that up.
And he didn't have a representation of this area, so that's how my quilt got into the show.
Oh. Bet your mom like that. I bet you like that.
Yeah.
You've gotten to a certain point in your journey. Are you still on the journey?
I'm still on the journey. I mean, you do come up with brick walls, but there's so many questions to answer, and so you just pick one and start working on it.
Start working on that one. Yeah. Christle, I had a good time.
Me too.
I like this. I learned a lot about, I've learned a lot about what you learned about your own family and your lineage and the work that you've done to get to where you are in putting your ancestry together. And I thank you for being with me today on Artists of Color. And I'm hoping that my audience enjoyed our hour together. So have a great day, and we will be back in February. Thank you.